Dry Fork had never been much of a town, but that morning it felt like it had been hollowed clean. The wind had scraped over every rooftop, whistled through every boarded-up store, carrying grit into my eyes and silence into my lungs. No sheriff anymore. The preacher had gone missing from his pulpit 3 Sundays back. Folks still filled the saloon at night, not because there was anything worth celebrating, but because being sober in that kind of quiet could drive a man to scratch the skin off his own hands. I came in from the North Trail, same as I always did when I needed salt, bullets, matches. My cabin's a mile out past the ridge, far enough that I don't hear their music or their fights. I keep to myself. Most in town like it that way. They've all heard something about me, that I killed a man, that I fought in the war and came back wrong. Truth is, I just learned the hard way that the fewer you know, the fewer graves you stand over. The air was sharp and dry, and I had a cloth sack slung over my shoulder. I'd been thinking about jerky and nails, nothing more. But when I passed the church, something made my boots slow. At first I thought it was a heap of cloth caught in the dust. Then I saw the arm, small, scraped, rope burns around the wrist. She was lying face down in the dirt, her dress torn 3 ways, shoulder, side, up the back, and her legs bent wrong, like she'd fallen and never bothered to fix herself. 1 boot was gone. Her stocking had a slash in it. The skirt had ridden up higher than decency would allow, but it wasn't indecency I saw. It was ruin. I crouched, one hand hovering over her back, watched the faint rise and fall of her ribs, barely breathing. There was no one to call, not the barkeep, not the deputy, not the preacher's wife who still swept these steps as if keeping them clean would keep the world decent. In this place, a woman could be left in the open like trash, and folks would step around her without a word. Her hair clung in dried clumps to her face, her lips cracked. She had a swollen bruise along her collarbone, and I looked away fast, not because I was squeamish, I've seen worse, but because she didn't need my eyes on her like that. I didn't know her name then, didn't know where she came from or what she'd done to make someone leave her like this, but I knew what I was looking at. I knew the weight of being left, so I slid my arms under her, slow as I could. Her body was light, too light, the limp of someone who hadn't eaten in days. Her head rolled against my shoulder, her breath warm and ragged on my neck. A curtain shifted in the nearby window. Closed again. I started walking. The path north climbs fast, curling through brittle rock and dry brush. My boots crunched over gravel, my arms steadying her every time she moaned. She didn't wake. She didn't ask where I was taking her. Maybe she couldn't. The sun was slipping lower by the time the ridge came into view. My cabin sat in the cedar's shadow, smoke still drifting from the morning fire. Split rail fence around the goat pen, water barrel half full, 1 chair, 1 bed, 1 rifle on the wall inside, a place made for one. I laid her down on the bed, stood back with my hands on my hips, trying to think it through. She needed water, bandages, maybe a doctor, but there wasn't one in this town I'd trust, and I wasn't about to drag her back down there, so it was me, just me. I fetched water, wiped the dust from her face, cut away the worst of the dress where the fabric was soaked in blood and filth. Her body told the story, bruises along the ribs, rope burns at the wrists swelling on her face, and deeper damage, the kind you don't see until you look in the eyes. I wasn't blind to her figure, but I wasn't thinking like that. She wasn't here for that. She was here because if I didn't carry her off that ground, she wouldn't have seen another sunrise. I found one of my old shirts, cut the back so it would fit her shoulders, and eased it over her head, covered her with a blanket, sat down by the stove and listened to her breathing, short at first, then deeper as the room warmed. That night, I didn't sleep. I never do when I bring someone this close to the fire. The wind rattled the glass, coyotes called from the hills, and I sat there in the half-light with this stranger in my bed, reminding myself of every reason I've kept my distance from people, reminding myself how quick it can turn from helping to losing. But I didn't move her, didn't send her back. There are moments in a man's life when he knows the next choice will carve him into something different than he was the day before. I had the sense this was one of those moments, and I didn't know yet whether it was going to save me or ruin me. If you're listening to this and you've walked past people lying in the dust, maybe not in Dry Fork, maybe in your own town, you'll know it's easier to keep your eyes forward, to pretend you didn't see. I could have done that, but I didn't. If you've stayed with me this far, I'd ask you to leave a comment. Tell me if you'd have stopped or if you'd have walked on. Click the like button if you think more folks ought to hear stories like this, and if you want to know what happened to her, and to me, subscribe so you don't miss the rest. I got her inside and shut the door against the wind. The cabin felt smaller with her in it, like it had been holding its breath for years and just realized it wasn't alone anymore. I set the sack of supplies on the table, but my eyes kept going back to the bed. She lay still, one arm crooked under her ribs, hair tangled across her cheek. There was a rawness to the way she breathed, shallow and uneven, like each one cost her something. I've patched my own wounds before, patched men in worse shape than her during the war, but this was different. She wasn't a comrade who'd signed up for the fight. She was just someone left out for the crows. I fetched a bowl of water from the barrel, lit the lantern, and pulled a cloth from the shelf. When the warm light hit her, the damage came clear, a swelling around her eye that would bloom black by morning, bruises on her ribs, rope burns dark as ink circling both wrists. I set my jaw and didn't let my mind wander to how she'd gotten them. The dress was ruined, blood in places that had already dried stiff, dirt ground into every seam. I took my knife and began cutting away the worst of it, working careful, so I didn't jostle her more than I had to. I wasn't gentle because I knew how. I was gentle because she looked like she hadn't felt that in a long time. She was light, too light. I could feel it in the way her shoulders lifted when I rolled her just enough to slide the shirt over her head. One of mine, gray, soft from years of washing. I'd cut the back open so it wouldn't pull on her shoulders. Once she was covered, I pulled the blanket up to her collarbone, tucked it under her arms, and stepped back. The cabin was quiet except for the low hiss of the stove. I pulled the chair close to the fire, sitting where I could see her face in the lamplight. Her lips were chapped, a faint tremor running along her jaw every now and then, the kind you get when your body's fighting to stay warm. I don't know how long I sat there, but somewhere in the night, her breathing shifted. I heard the change before I saw it, the faint hitch, like her lungs remembered they were allowed to work. Then came the sound of fabric shifting, and her eyes opened halfway. For a second, I thought she was seeing me, but then the panic hit. She tried to push herself up, arms flailing weakly. "Don't," I said, keeping my voice low, even. "You're not ready." She blinked, her gaze darting around the room like a trapped bird. I didn't reach for her. I know what it feels like when someone's hands are the last thing you want. Her lips moved, the words ragged. I leaned forward, trying to catch them. "I didn't touch you," I said before she could ask. "You were behind the church. No one else came." She stilled, just enough to listen. Her fingers clutched at the blanket, pulling it higher. She turned her face away, and I took that for what it was. Not trust, but maybe the first step toward it. I stayed in my chair, back against the wall. I wasn't going to crowd her. Outside, the wind picked up, and a coyote let out a long, lonesome call in the hills. The sound has never bothered me, but that night, it made the air in the cabin feel tighter. Two strangers in one room, both of us listening to each other's silence. By morning, the coals in the stove had gone to a dull orange. I'd been sitting there most of the night, arms crossed, eyes half on the fire, half on her. She'd slept, if you could call it that, without waking again after the first panic. Somewhere near dawn, she rolled to her side, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. When the light finally came through the window, it caught her face, and I saw her blink against it. No fear this time, just the slow, cautious look of someone measuring where they'd landed. Her eyes moved from the beams in the ceiling to the stove, then to me. We just looked at each other for a moment, not hostile, not friendly, just two people taking stock. "My cabin," I said, breaking the quiet. Her gaze dropped to the blanket, then to her bare legs beneath it. She scanned for her dress and didn't see it. "You were behind the church," I told her before she could ask. "I brought you here." A beat of silence. "You do anything to me?" "No." The answer came out steady, no hesitation. She watched me for a long second, her fingers tightening on the quilt. "Cut the dress off to clean your wounds," I added. "You were in bad shape. Didn't see anything I didn't have to." She seemed to take that in, though her shoulders stayed tight, coiled like a spring. "I don't know you." "You don't have to." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing." That stopped her. I could see it in the way her mouth opened like she might argue, then shut again. She looked away, the dry crack of her lips catching the light. I stood, walked to the table, and poured water into a tin cup. When I brought it to her, she flinched. Not much, just enough for me to see it. I didn't say anything about it, held the cup out until she took it in both hands. The first sip made her wince, but she drank half and set it on the side table. "What's your name?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "Eliza Quinn." I nodded once. "Mason." She studied me then, the heavy beard, the scar over my brow, the quiet I've learned to keep in my eyes. There was no threat in them, no warmth either, just presence. She didn't know it yet, but I'd already made up my mind. I wasn't going to let her die here, not in this cabin, not in this valley. The morning settled in slow, thin light spilling across the floorboards, catching in the steam curling from the pot on the stove. I'd left beans and corn simmering all night, figuring she'd need something warm in her when she woke for good. She was propped up on one elbow now, the blanket wrapped tight, my shirt hanging loose on her frame. She didn't seem to care how it fell, or maybe she didn't notice. Her eyes followed me as I moved about the room, but she didn't say anything at first. Then, in a voice still rough from whatever she'd been through, she asked, "You do anything to me?" I didn't let it hang. No. I saw her weighing that, watching me like she was waiting for some flicker in my face to prove me wrong. I met her stare and let the quiet speak for itself. "I cut the dress off to clean your wounds," I said, not rushing the words. "You were in bad shape. Didn't see anything I didn't have to." Her shoulders stayed tight, but something in her breathing eased. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the first hairline crack in the wall she had around herself. "I don't know you," she said. "You don't have to." That got me a longer look. Her voice sharpened. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing." The word seemed to catch her off guard, like it didn't fit into any box she knew how to handle. She glanced down, mouth working like she might push it, but then she let it go. I poured water from the pitcher into a clean tin cup and carried it to her side. She flinched as I came close, not enough to draw back, just a small twitch in the shoulders. But I saw it. I didn't call it out. Just held the cup steady until she took it with both hands. The first sip made her wince, but she kept going, drank half, and handed it back without looking at me. "What's your name?" I asked. "Eliza Quinn." I nodded once. "Mason, just Mason." She studied me, eyes moving slow over my face, the scar, the beard, the patched shirt. I knew what she saw, a man alone long enough that his words were measured and his eyes didn't give much away. But I didn't look at her like she was a problem to solve or a debt to collect. And maybe that was new for her. She broke the stare first. "You live here alone?" I nodded. "For how long?" "A while." She pulled the blanket higher, tucking it under her chin. "I don't know what they did to me," she said, softer now, almost to herself. "I remember some faces, laughing, someone hitting me, then nothing." "You don't have to talk about it." "I wasn't," she said quickly, and that flash of defense told me she was used to people either prying or pitying, and she didn't want either. "I'm just trying to figure out what the hell happened." I didn't push her, just turned back to the stove, stirred the pot. The smell of beans and jerky filled the room. "You'll need food," I said. She didn't argue. Her stomach did the talking, growling low enough for her to press a hand to it. I ladled the stew into a bowl and set it on the table beside her. She didn't thank me, but she didn't refuse it either. Her fingers wrapped tight around the bowl, hiding the tremor in her hand as she took careful bites, like she half expected me to take it away before she was done. While she ate, her eyes roamed the cabin. I could see her noting the order, the way every tool, every coat, every rifle had a place. No liquor bottles, no cards, no signs of anyone else, just survival and the quiet that comes with it. Finally, she set the spoon down. "You didn't have to bring me here." "No." "So why did you?" "I couldn't leave you there." "You don't even know me." "Didn't matter." She stared at me for a long time, like she was trying to find the angle. The hook, the thing that would make sense of it. "You going to keep me here?" she asked. "You can leave when you're strong enough." She looked away at that, but her voice came back softer, without the edge. "What if I don't have anywhere to go?" I met her eyes then. "Then you stay." A gust of wind rattled the window, and she sat for a while just staring into the fire, the food forgotten beside her. I didn't press. I've learned that some decisions need to stew longer than beans ever will. I went back to my chair by the wall, let the quiet settle in. She didn't ask for more water, didn't ask what I expected from her in return. She was trying to read me, and I was trying not to feel too much. I didn't know who had hurt her or how deep that damage went. But I recognized the look, guarded, worn out, and just this side of breaking. I'd seen it in my own reflection once. The difference was I had no one who pulled me off the ground back then. She did now, and I figured I'd give her space, give her time, and if she walked out that door in a week or a month, I'd let her. But if she stayed, I'd make sure no one laid a hand on her again. The third morning brought a sharp bite in the air, the kind that wakes you before you're ready. I'd been outside since first light, breaking ground for the onion bulbs I'd traded for in town. The soil up here isn't rich, but if you work it, it'll give something back. I had my shirt off, sweat on my back despite the chill, the shovel biting into the dirt with each push. When I glanced toward the cabin, she was at the window, the quilt pulled tight around her shoulders. She stayed there a long minute, watching. I didn't wave, didn't nod, just kept working. By the time I finished the first row, she'd stepped outside. Barefoot, her hair tangled but her eyes clearer than I'd seen them yet. She spotted the bundle I'd left on the porch, a pair of boots I'd found in town the day before, worn but whole, about her size. She didn't ask where I'd gotten them, didn't need to. I pointed to the small canvas bag by the onion pile. "Help if you can." She looked at the bag, then at the rows of turned earth. I figured she might tell me she wasn't ready, that her ribs still hurt too much. But after a moment, she crossed the yard, knelt down in the dirt, and opened the bag. I didn't tell her how to do it. I just kept working and let her watch until she started copying me, fingers in the soil, setting each bulb root side down about 6 inches apart. Her movements were slow, but careful. It wasn't pity work. She wanted to get it right. We worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the scrape of the shovel and the soft thud of earth falling back into place. Then she spoke. "I remember their faces now." I didn't look up. "Yeah?" "3 men. The one with the ring on his boot, he's the one that hit me." I tamped the dirt over another bulb. "You want to go back and deal with it?" She shook her head. "No, not yet." "Then you wait. Heal first." I felt her eyes on me for a long second before she asked, "Why do you care?" I stood, wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my arm, and walked to the water barrel, filled a tin cup, and brought it back to her. "Because I know what it's like to not be believed, to be hurt and have no one stand up." She took the cup without a word, drank, then set it in the dirt beside her. "I wasn't always like this," she said after a moment. "I figured. I used to sing, not in that little backwater saloon. I mean real places, theaters in Chicago. My mother played piano. My father worked in rail contracts. I had dresses with glass buttons. What happened? Made a bad choice. Trusted the wrong man, got thrown out of the house, started singing again but in worse places. Thought I could climb back up." She paused, pressing her hands into the dirt like she could ground herself there. "Ended up in Yuma. Got noticed by a traveling show promoter who said he could set me up with a proper job in Dry Fork. I was tired, said yes. And they threw you behind a church," I said quietly. She nodded, jaw tight. The wind carried the smell of cedar down from the ridge. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then she asked, "What about you? You live out here like a ghost. Why?" "I earned it." She gave me a look. "That doesn't sound like something people usually earn." I stared down at my hands. "I hurt people, years ago, during the war, after the war, things I can't undo." "You ever kill someone?" "Yes." I left it there. Some truths don't need detail. She must have felt that line in the air because she didn't push. When the last row was planted, I gathered the tools, leaned them against the cabin wall. She followed me inside, sat at the table, rubbing soil from her fingers with a scrap of cloth. "Why did you patch the dress?" she asked suddenly. "Seemed wrong to throw it out. And the boots, yours were gone. These fit close enough." She stared at me a second longer than was comfortable, like she was on the verge of saying something else, but all she said was, "Thank you." I didn't answer, just stoked the fire and set a pot on to boil. Steam rose in soft curls, the air filling with the scent of beans. That night we ate in silence again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. She sat closer to the stove, closer to me. Her eyes weren't darting toward the door anymore. She still wasn't sure of me, but I could feel something loosening in the air between us. Not trust exactly, but the possibility of it. And I found I didn't mind that as much as I thought I would. By the next morning, she was moving easier, though she still winced when she twisted too quick. I'd gone out to check the goat pen before the sun had cleared the ridge, and when I came back in, she was at the table, running her fingers over the mended seams of her dress. I'd patched it a few nights before, sitting by lamplight after she'd fallen asleep. I didn't think she'd notice, or if she did, that she'd say anything. She looked up when she heard the door close. "You did this," she said. Not quite a question. Seemed wrong to throw it out. Her hand traced the stitching along the shoulder where the fabric had torn. "You matched the thread." "Best I could." For a moment she just stared at the cloth, thumb brushing the neat rows. Then she lifted her eyes to me. "You didn't have to." I shrugged. "Maybe not." She gave me that look again, the one that made me feel like she was trying to read something carved under my skin. But whatever she saw, she kept to herself. She pulled the dress closer, folded it neatly on the chair beside her. I put coffee on the stove, the sound of it beginning to perk, filling the cabin. She sat quiet, her hands resting on the table. The way she held herself had shifted. She wasn't curled in tight anymore, ready to bolt. She was sitting straighter, elbows loose, her eyes taking in the room without that guarded flicker they'd had before. When I set a tin cup in front of her, she wrapped her hands around it like she was soaking up the heat. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. I nodded, took my seat across from her. We drank in silence, but it wasn't the heavy kind anymore. It felt more like the quiet you get after a long day's work, the kind that doesn't need filling. Outside, the wind had died, and the sun was spilling across the yard in that pale spring way, touching the tops of the cedar branches. After a while, she said, "I don't remember the last time someone fixed something for me just because." I kept my eyes on my cup. Not much trouble to match a thread. "It's not the thread," she said. "It's the not having to pay for it." I didn't answer right away. I knew what she meant, though she didn't have to explain. In places like Yuma, kindness always came with a tag on it, a price, a hook. "You don't owe me anything," I said finally. Her gaze stayed steady. "I'm starting to believe that." We finished the coffee, and I took the cups to the basin. She rose and moved to the stove without me asking, took the spoon, and began stirring the pot of beans I'd left from the night before. I let her, watching the way her shoulders moved under my shirt, the way her hair had come loose and fell into her face. When she turned, she caught me looking. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "Just not used to someone moving around in here." She smirked, the smallest curve of her mouth, but it was there. "Guess you'll have to get used to it." It was the first time she'd spoken like she might still be here tomorrow. I didn't say it out loud, but I took note of it, stored it away like you store the last match in a cold winter. We ate side by side that night, the bowls resting on the table between us. She didn't wait for me to offer seconds. She helped herself, then passed the ladle back without a word. I liked that, the easy way it happened. No hesitation, no checking if I'd mind. After supper, she stayed near the fire while I mended a tear in one of my shirts. I could feel her watching my hands work, the steady push and pull of the needle. At one point she said, "You're good at that." "Had to be," I said. "Not many to sew for me out here." She was quiet for a while, then asked, "You fix things because you need them to last?" I glanced at her. "Yeah, and because throwing something away when it's still got use seems like a waste." Her eyes softened. She didn't say it, but I think she knew I wasn't just talking about fabric. Later, when the fire burned low, she pulled her chair a little closer to mine, not enough to touch, but close enough that I could feel the heat of her there. We didn't speak, didn't have to. The room was filled with the steady sound of the stove, the faint creak of the cabin settling against the night. It struck me then how far she'd come from that first morning, wrapped in a blanket and looking at me like I was just another threat she had to outlast. She still had her guard up, but there was a new weight in her eyes now. Not the kind that drags you under, but the kind that keeps you standing. When I finally rose to bank the fire, she stayed seated, her gaze following me across the room. I could feel it warm on my back. "You always this quiet?" she asked. "Only when I've got something worth listening to." That made her smile again, a little easier this time. And as I stood there watching the embers settle into a soft red glow, I realized I didn't mind the thought of her voice filling this place a little more. I'd gone out before sunup, same as most mornings, to check the snares I'd set a ways off. The air was cold enough to bite the inside of my nose, the ground still holding that brittle frost that doesn't break until the sun's been up a while. When I came back, I spotted her near the woodpile, the axe buried in the chopping stump. She had both hands on the handle, her breath puffing in the chill, and a half-split log in front of her. I stopped just inside the fence, watching for a moment. Her swing was off, the blade biting to one side, but she yanked it free and tried again. This time the log split, not clean, but enough to make her shoulders set with a kind of stubborn pride. "You're not ready for that," I called, my voice carrying across the yard. She didn't turn around. "I did it anyway." I stepped closer, slow, not wanting her to think I was coming to take the axe from her. "You could open that rib again." "I've had worse." "Doesn't mean you should test it." She wiped her brow with the sleeve of her patched dress, finally turning to face me. Her eyes had that sharp glint I'd started to recognize. Not challenge exactly, but something near it. "You were gone, checking snares. I thought maybe you'd—" She stopped herself. "Leave?" She gave one short nod. "I told you I wouldn't." Her gaze shifted away then, to the ground between us. Something in her jaw tightened, and I could see she was swallowing more than just her words. "I don't know how to be around someone who doesn't want anything from me," she said finally. I let the silence stretch, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted her to know I was taking the question seriously. "You don't owe me a damn thing," I said. "That's not what I mean." "I know." When she looked back up, there was a shine in her eyes, not quite tears, but close enough that I recognized the fight it was taking to keep them there and not let them fall. Not from sadness, from confusion, from the kind of whiplash you feel when the ground under you shifts and you're not sure if it's solid or about to give way. I walked the last few steps toward her, slow enough she could see me coming, reached out and set my hand on the middle of her back, just my palm, warm and steady, no squeeze, no claim, just there. She didn't flinch. For a few seconds we stood like that, the sound of the wind moving through the cedar branches, the faint creak of the fence behind us, her breathing evening out under my hand. It was the smallest thing, but I could feel it matter to her, the difference between a touch that takes and a touch that stays. Then I stepped back. "I left food inside," I said. "You should eat." She nodded, walking past me toward the porch. But when she reached the steps, she paused, looking over her shoulder. "You always this careful?" "Only when it matters." She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either before disappearing inside. I followed a minute later and found her at the table with a cloth-wrapped loaf of bread I'd pulled from the stove earlier, the steam still rising off it. Beside it, the good jar of beans. She didn't wait for me, just unwrapped the bread, tore off a piece, and started eating. The silence in the room wasn't the brittle kind anymore. It was cleaner. She didn't look like she was bracing for whatever came next, and for the first time since I'd carried her here, I realized I wasn't bracing either. When I went back outside to haul in the rabbits I'd caught, I didn't expect her to move from that spot, but when I stepped in the doorway again, she was already at the stove, boiling water, bandages laid out on the table. She looked at the gash on my forearm and didn't say a word, just took my arm, cleaned it, and wrapped it. "You don't have to," I said. "I know," she replied, tying the knot neat and tight, "but I'm doing it anyway." Her fingers brushed the back of my hand before she pulled away, and I didn't move, didn't pull back. "You ever think about going back?" she asked. "Back where?" "Wherever you're from, before all this." I shook my head. Nothing back there worth finding. She nodded once, her eyes steady on mine. I understood that look. She didn't want to go back either. Not to Yuma. Not to whatever came before it. And I think in that moment we both knew the truth. Whatever this was, however it started, it was more than either of us had expected to have again. The day after she wrapped my arm, the weather turned soft. Not warm exactly, but the wind had lost its bite. We spent the morning moving in a rhythm that didn't need speaking. I salted down the rabbits I'd brought in. She cleared the table, wiped it with a damp cloth, then began slicing thin strips of meat for drying. It struck me that neither of us had asked the other what to do. We just fell into it like we'd been doing it for years. Every so often I'd glance over and catch her humming under her breath. Not loud. Not the kind of singing she'd told me about from her days in Chicago. This was quieter, like she wasn't even aware she was doing it. I didn't interrupt. Around midday, I told her I needed to check the shells in the barn and asked if she was up for it. She didn't hesitate, just nodded, wiped her hands on her skirt, and followed me. The barn smelled of cedar dust and old hay. Shafts of sunlight came through the slats in the walls, cutting across the floor in long gold stripes. She wandered to the back where the shelves stood, rough cedar boards stacked with blankets, flour, jars of pickled roots. I was at the workbench checking a crate of tools when I heard the scrape of wood on wood, then the soft thump of something hitting the ground. She'd tried to pull a box from the top shelf, and it had given way. The lid had split, spilling papers across the dirt floor. As she bent to gather them, I turned and saw the tintype in her hands. The frame was chipped, the glass cracked, but the image was still clear enough. A woman in a dark dress, sitting straight in an old wooden chair. A boy beside her, maybe 10 years old, clean-faced with hair combed neat. My hair. She didn't speak, just lifted her eyes to mine, holding the photograph with both hands like it might break further if she moved too quick. "I wasn't trying to find anything," she said quietly. "I know." Her thumb traced the carved words along the frame. "Sarah?" I nodded once. "My wife died years ago, before I came out here, before I stopped talking to people." She held the photo a moment longer, then stepped to the shelf and set it back down, careful not to knock the papers still scattered on the floor. "Do you want me to put it away?" "No, let it stay." We stood there for a moment, the smell of hay thick around us. She wiped her palms on her dress, her gaze steady on mine. "Thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me enough not to lie." I didn't know how to answer that, so I didn't. Back in the cabin that evening, we didn't mention it again. I stoked the fire and brought the rifles down from the hooks for cleaning. She watched for a while, then asked how to check for rust. I showed her, slow and steady, guiding her hands along the barrel. The lamplight caught in her hair, and every so often her fingers would tremble from the cold, and I'd wrap my hand over hers just long enough to steady it. Later, when it was time to turn in, I reached for the chair like I always did, but she stopped me. "You don't have to sit over there," she said. I looked at her. "I trust you now." That's not nothing, I thought, but didn't say. I took the extra quilt from the peg on the wall and laid it out on the floor beside her bed. She didn't argue. The fire burned low, throwing a soft glow across the room. I lay there listening to the wind press against the cabin, her breathing steady just above me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the quiet was mine alone to keep. The knock came just after noon. I was outside splitting kindling, the kind of work that keeps your hands moving while your mind drifts. The air was still, the smell of smoke from the stove drifting out into the yard. When I heard it, 2 short raps, not loud, not impatient, I set the axe aside and brushed the wood dust from my palms. Inside, she was at the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, pressing cornmeal into a pan. Her face was warm from the fire, hair pulled back but still falling in loose strands around her cheeks. She stopped mid-motion, eyes flicking toward the door. The knock came again, same rhythm. She wiped her hands on a cloth and opened it. A man stood on the porch, mid-30s, clean gloves, dust on his coat and boots, but his posture was the kind of straight you get from years behind a desk, not a saddle. His horse was tied a few feet off. "Eliza Quinn?" he asked, voice even. Her back straightened. "I'm Eliza." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper sealed in red wax. Came up through the marshal's station. Passed through Dry Fork. Clerk said where to find you." He handed it over. I stepped into the doorway then, wiping my hands on a rag. Didn't say a word, just stood there beside the frame, my eyes on him. "I don't know what it says," the man added, gesturing toward the envelope. "Just delivering it." Eliza took it without a word. He tipped his hat and left. No questions, no lingering. When she shut the door, the cabin felt different. Not dangerous, but the quiet had shifted. She sat at the table, the letter in her lap like it might decide on its own whether to open or stay shut. I leaned against the wall and waited. She broke the seal with her thumb, unfolded the paper. Her eyes moved over it slow, lips tightening. "It's from Curtis Mayfield," she said after a moment. "Owner of the saloon in Yuma." She looked down again. "Says the 3 men who attacked me are gone. 1 found dead in the desert, the other 2 scattered. Word got around that I was alive, that someone dangerous had taken me in." She glanced at me when she said that. I didn't answer. "Didn't expect that," she murmured. Folded the letter and set it on the table. I stayed where I was, arms crossed. "I thought I wanted revenge," she went on. "Dreamed about it, about hurting them or watching someone else do it." She let out a dry breath. "But now they're gone, and I'm here. And it doesn't feel like I thought it would." She walked to the window, the light hitting her in a soft orange wash as the sun dipped behind the ridge. "I don't want to go back," she said quietly. "I don't even want to go into town. They left me there. I don't owe them a song." "You don't owe anyone anything," I said. Her eyes found mine. "I owe you something." "No, you don't. I was dumped like trash, Mason. And I picked you up. Why?" For a second, I thought about sidestepping the question, but this time I didn't. Because I wanted to. The words landed between us, heavier than I meant them to. She took a slow step toward me. "Then let me stay." I blinked. "Stay? I'm not just asking to sleep here. I want to be here. I want to learn, cook, plant, build. I want to know where you go when you disappear in the morning." Her voice didn't waver. "I'm more sure of this than anything I've ever done." I studied her face, the way her jaw set, the way she didn't drop her gaze. "You're sure?" "Yes." I felt something shift in my chest, not sudden but steady, like a door that had been closed for years, finally easing open. "Then stay." Her shoulders dropped just a little. Whatever weight she'd been carrying in asking the question seemed to slide off. She reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. Her thumb moved over the inside of my palm, slow, like she was learning it the way some folks learn a trail in the dark. We stood there beside the table, no rush to move. Outside, the sun slipped lower, turning the yard gold. The goats quieted. The smell of baking cornmeal filled the air. It didn't feel like rescue anymore. It didn't feel like debt. It just felt like 2 people deciding, without speeches or promises, that they weren't going anywhere. Spring came late that year. The hills around the cabin still held the pale, tired look of winter, but here and there, green had started pushing up through the rocks. Small, stubborn things that didn't ask for permission. The onion rows we'd planted were showing their first sprouts, and the goats had put on weight. Life felt slower, but not empty. She'd been here long enough that the days had found their rhythm. One afternoon, I was at the fence mending a loose rail when I heard her laugh. Not a polite chuckle. Not the kind you give to make someone else feel good. It was real, deep enough to make her breath catch halfway through. I looked up. She was on the porch, shaking out a blanket, the wind snapping at it until it almost flew from her hands. She caught it just in time and let out that laugh again, breathy and warm. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard her sound like that. She noticed me watching. "What?" "Nothing." "No, you're staring." "I do that sometimes." She tossed the blanket over the railing and stepped down toward me, her hair loose and moving in the breeze. "You always this good at watching people?" "Only when I like what I see." That stopped her. Her smile softened, slowed. She closed the distance between us by a step. "You ever going to kiss me?" I didn't look away. "I will." Her brow lifted. "But not now." "I'll kiss you when I'm sure you won't flinch." She held my gaze. "I haven't flinched in days." "I know." I stepped toward her, slow, letting her see my hand as I reached for her chin. My fingers were warm from the sun, rough from the fence work. She closed her eyes, and I kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't the kind of kiss that asks for anything. It stayed. When I pulled back, her forehead rested against mine, her hand on my chest. We stood like that until the wind picked up again. Later, we went inside to work on the shelves we'd been talking about building for 2 weeks. I measured the boards while she held them steady, her grip firm, her stance solid. She'd gotten stronger, could carry more without wobbling. She didn't move like someone waiting for permission anymore. That night, she made biscuits. I'd taught her once. Hers came out better than mine, though I didn't say it. We ate at the table, firelight moving across the walls. She reached for my hand without looking up. I didn't pull away. After a while, she asked, "Do you miss her?" I knew who she meant. "Yes." "You think she'd hate me?" "No, I think she'd thank you." Her eyes lifted, a question there. "For pulling me out of the damn hole I was rotting in," I said. Her throat worked like she was swallowing something heavy. Relief, maybe. She leaned in then, kissed me again. This one deeper, more certain. Clothes fell away slow, nothing hurried, nothing hidden. I kissed the scar on her shoulder. She traced the long line across my ribs. We didn't say love, didn't make promises. But in the stillness after, with her hand over my chest and my breath warm against her collarbone, everything that needed saying had already been said. Morning came early. I was up before her, putting coffee on the stove. She came to the table wearing my shirt, her legs tucked under her. I set a cup in front of her. "You staying?" I asked. She took a slow sip, blew across the rim. "Ain't that obvious?" I met her eyes, let the quiet stretch between us. Two people who'd stopped running, who didn't need speeches or vows, just the choice to stay. That was enough. Spring never came all at once here. It eased in slow, like it wanted to make sure you'd earned it. The hills were still the color of dust, but pockets of green were starting to push through in the cracks between rock. The onions we'd planted were standing straighter now, stubborn little rows that had made it through the last cold snap. The goats were fattening, and inside the cabin, there was something I hadn't felt in years, the kind of quiet that didn't weigh on you, but steadied you. One evening, I was sitting by the fence, just watching the light stretch across the valley, when I realized she was laughing again. Not the cautious kind. It was easy now, the sound of it carrying out the door and into the yard. She came down the steps, hair loose, sleeves rolled, and said, "You look like you're thinking too hard." "Maybe I am." "About what?" "About how different this place feels with you in it." She didn't answer right away, just stepped up beside me and leaned against the rail. We stood like that, shoulder to shoulder, until the sun dipped low. Days rolled on. We built the shelves we'd been talking about since winter, added a second chair to the table. Her choice didn't match the first one, but she said she liked it that way. She moved in the cabin like it was hers, not asking before reaching for something, not hesitating before opening the door to go out. That's how I knew she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living here. One night over supper, she looked at me across the table and said, "You think we're, settled now?" I thought about it. "I think we've stopped running." Her smile was small, but it stayed. "That's something, isn't it? It's everything." I've learned more from her in these months than I'd admit out loud. I learned that not every wound needs fixing the moment you see it. Some heal better with time and space. I learned that touch doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. Sometimes it's a taking, sometimes it's a tether, and you've got to let a person decide which it's going to be. And maybe the hardest thing I learned is that letting someone in doesn't always end the way you fear it will. Sometimes it's the only way you stop being alone, even if you've convinced yourself that's how you're meant to live. She's changed too. I can see it in her shoulders, in the way she walks the yard without looking over at first, like she's expecting someone to be there. She works with her hands now, planting, mending, hauling water, and she's proud of the calluses she's starting to get. She still sings under her breath when she thinks I'm not listening. And she still looks at me sometimes like she's trying to solve a puzzle, but it's not the same guarded stare she had that first morning. We don't talk about Yuma anymore. We don't talk about the men who hurt her, or the places I've been where I did my own share of hurting. We know those stories are there. They don't need retelling. What we talk about now is when to plant the next crop, whether we've got enough wood stacked for summer storms, and how the hell we're going to keep the goats from chewing through the new fence. Some nights, after the fire's burned low, she'll lean back in her chair and say, "You think we deserve this? This kind of peace?" And I'll tell her the truth. Yeah, we do. Because that's what this is. Not a rescue, not a debt, not even a fresh start. It's just two people deciding every morning to keep staying put. If you're listening to this, maybe you've had your own version of Dry Fork, a place or a season where everything felt stripped bare, where the wind cut through you, where the only thing that made sense was to keep your head down and get through it alone. I'm telling you now, you don't always have to keep walking past what's lying broken in the dirt. And if you're the one lying there, you don't have to believe the first person who tells you you're not worth the trouble. Sometimes the right one will just pick you up and carry you until you can stand again. I didn't plan for her to be here. Hell, I didn't plan for anyone to be here. But now, I can't picture this cabin without her boots by the door or her sewing left on the table. I can't picture going a day without hearing her voice, even if it's just to tell me I've measured a board wrong. That's the thing about choosing to stay. You start out thinking it's for a night or a season or until you get your strength back. Then one day, you realize you're not counting the days anymore. So yeah, we're settled now. Not in the way folks in town might think, with papers or rings or some preacher's blessing, but in the way that matters to me. The kind where I know if I walk out to the ridge in the morning, she'll be here when I come back. And if she ever wants to walk that ridge herself, she'll know I'm here waiting. That's the whole of it. That's the story. If you've stuck with me to the end, I'd ask you to hit that like button so more folks find their way to it. Leave a comment and tell me, have you ever stopped for someone when you could have kept walking, or has someone ever stopped for you? And if you want to hear more of these true-hearted stories, go on and subscribe. There's more I could tell you, and maybe, just maybe, one of them will be yours.